Hey, Soul Stories fam. We've got a swoon-worthy love story for you today. Let's jump in and tell us, what city are you watching from? Seattle wasn't pleasant that night. A fine drizzle hung in the air, damp enough to frizz hair, but not enough to justify opening an umbrella. Evelyn Park pulled her gray coat tighter around her, clutching a thick stack of files to her chest as if it were her own child. It was 10:30 p.m. Every office light had already gone out, except for the floor where she worked, which the security guard jokingly called the lighthouse of workaholics. Yeah, that's me, Evie muttered. She was a forensic auditor for the Second Harbor Foundation, a job her friends summed up in 3 words: following the money. Every time a restoration project submitted financial paperwork, Evie meticulously reviewed every detail, checking whether each receipt was valid. At first it sounded impressive, but after 7 years it had become an obsession with A4 paper and printer ink. The taxi stand on the street was empty. No car bothered to stop. Evie sighed. A 40-minute walk home means free exercise. Just need to dodge the puddles and not think about my brand new shoes falling apart. She walked along the brick-paved slope, passing rows of brightly lit bars. From inside, the sound of a saxophone spilled out, smooth as honey, making her stomach growl at the worst moment. People are drinking, and I'm carrying invoices. The perfect portrait of a 31-year-old single woman. Suddenly, bang! The bar door burst open, and a man stumbled out. The impact was so hard that Evie's files flew from her arms like paper birds. The dry, serious numbers of the Second Harbor Foundation now fluttered into the damp street as if they, too, longed to be free. Oh no! My papers! Evie dove down, muttering curses under her breath as she tried to gather them. The man dropped down too, scrambling to help. He had slightly messy brown hair, a sharp, square jawline, and a few lazy stubbles that somehow made him look cinematic. When his hazel eyes met hers, Evie froze for a beat. "I'm sorry, I didn't see you," he said, voice hoarse and rushed. Evie narrowed her eyes, irritation heavy in her tone. "Were you running a marathon inside that bar?" "Look at this. All the figures are jumbled now." The man let out a strained laugh. "I really am sorry. Let me help. Is this financial reporting?" "That's right. I need it intact for cross-checking." "And now," Evie shook her head, her voice sharp as a blade, "now I'll be reorganizing all weekend." Before he could respond, his face suddenly froze. His eyes flicked nervously toward the bar door. Evie turned and saw a glamorous couple stepping out. The woman was blonde, in a red dress, her gaze sweeping the street like a radar. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, built like a beam of timber. In an instant, the stranger grabbed Evie's arm and locked it into his elbow. His urgent breath brushed her ear. "Just keep walking," he whispered, "and pretend you're my wife." Evie's eyes widened. "Excuse me, what?" But it was too late. The blonde spotted him and waved like a flare. "Adrian, here you are. God, I thought you'd run off." Adrian? Evie blinked. So that was his name. And now? She was officially Mrs. Adrian, whether she liked it or not. Adrian squeezed her hand lightly, a silent plea. "Lauren, Teddy, this is my wife." His voice was so confident that Evie nearly believed it herself, even though he didn't even know her name. Evie, more used to boardroom comebacks than improv acting, forced a polite smile. "Pleasure to meet again. I'm Evelyn, but call me Evie." "Oh my goodness," Lauren laughed. "His wife?" "Really?" Adrian finally settled down. "We must go inside and toast to this." Evie wanted to object, but Teddy, tall as a lamppost, had already offered his hand politely to guide her. And so, 5 minutes later, she found herself sitting awkwardly in a cozy bar with a glass of red wine in front of her. Lauren leaned in, her eyes gleaming like a spotlight. "So, how did you two meet?" "It must be such a romantic story." Evie froze. She was an auditor, not a screenwriter, but Adrian's pleading eyes locked on her. "So, fine." "At a bookstore," Evie blurted. "We both reached for the last copy. The only one left." Lauren squealed. "A romance novel?" "No, personal finance," Evie said flatly. Adrian chuckled, picking up the story. And we decided to share the book, then ended up sharing coffee too. Teddy nodded solemnly, as if he had just heard the love story of the decade. Everything continued like a comedy skit. Adrian mentioned their cat, Winston, and Evie immediately blurted out, "I'm allergic to cats." The table went dead silent. Adrian quickly covered, Winston's staying with my sister, so we date outside for health reasons." Evie sniffled, holding back a laugh. "Well, acting is kind of fun." Close to midnight, Lauren and Teddy finally said their goodbyes, not without scheduling a double date for the following week. Outside, Evie leaned against the rain-damp brick wall with a sigh of relief. Adrian released her hand, speaking awkwardly. "Thank you for playing along. I don't know how to put it into words. Lauren is my ex-girlfriend's best friend. If she saw me alone, I'd be dragged into endless gossip again." Evie crossed her arms. "And your solution was to drag a stranger into being your fake wife?" Adrian scratched his head, grinning like a kid caught stealing cookies. "Well, a short-term solution, but you played the role brilliantly." Evie let out a soft laugh. "Fine, I'll let the paperwork incident slide. We're even. No, more than even." "I owe you a big favor," Adrian said, his eyes so earnest that Evie felt unexpectedly unsettled. They stood in silence for a few seconds. Jazz music drifted faintly from inside, mixing with the patter of rain on the asphalt. Evie hugged the stack of files tighter and turned to leave. "Anyway, I should go. 200 receipts still need sorting." Adrian nodded, a hint of regret in his expression. "At least let me call you a taxi?" "No need. I live close." Their handshake lingered longer than necessary. Their smiles were a little shy. Then they went their separate ways. As Evie walked off, an odd feeling stirred inside her, as if that silly charade had cracked open. Something real. She chuckled softly, shaking her head. A fake wife? Utter madness. But under the Seattle rain, for the first time in months, her steps felt lighter. On Monday morning, the Second Harbor Foundation's office was as noisy as ever. Printers whirred, phones rang nonstop, and Evie had been punching numbers since 8 a.m. She thought she was in for an ordinary week, until Patricia, the curly-haired receptionist famous for gossip, appeared at her desk with a mischievous smile. "Got something for you, Evie." In front of her was a bouquet of yellow tulips so big it nearly blocked her computer screen. The petals were plump, golden as sunlight, and instantly drew her co-workers into a chorus of chatter. Well, well, who's it from?" "Somebody sent flowers to an auditor?" The world must be ending. "A secret admirer, huh?" Evie's cheeks flushed. She opened her mouth to deny it, but Patricia was quicker. From the middle of the bouquet, she pulled out a small, elegant card and read it aloud, deliberately stretching out each word. "Friday night, Salt and Story, if you'll accept, from your husband." The office erupted in laughter. Her husband! We missed Evie's wedding already. Evie snatched the card back, her face burning. One glance at the neat handwriting and she knew the culprit. Adrian, or rather Adrian Cole. The man actually had the audacity to send flowers to her office. God, why did I have to mention the foundation's name the other night? All week, Evie juggled her reports while enduring endless teasing from her co-workers. Yet come Friday evening, she still found herself standing in front of Salt and Story in a simple navy dress. She muttered to herself, "Fine, I'll go. Just to pay off the fake wife's debt. That's all. Nothing more." Salt and Story was a small place tucked along a cobblestone street near the harbor. Its weathered wooden sign hung crookedly, and inside the air was rich with the scent of toasted bread and steamed clams. The owner, Mira, Evie's best friend since college, nearly dropped her tray when she saw Evie walk in. "Evie Park is going on a date? Is the apocalypse here already?" "It's not a date," Evie shot back quickly. "Just a thank you dinner." "Right, because yellow tulips always mean thank you." Mira smirked and led her to a reserved table. Adrian was already there, in a light blue shirt, tapping his fingers lightly against his water glass. He rose when he saw her. "You actually came," he said, as if half in disbelief. Evie took a steadying breath. "Yeah, I thought I should come to close the play. This time, no audience. He gave a small smile, relief flickering across his face. Mira herself brought out 2 steaming bowls of clam chowder. House specialty. If you two don't marry each other, at least marry the soup. She grinned and walked off, leaving them awkwardly staring at each other. Her chowder's always special, Evie said, blowing on her spoon. She used to joke that keeping her grandma's recipe intact was the only way to keep the soul of the family. Adrian tilted his head. And you agree with that? Keeping the old things? Of course, Evie frowned. Some old things are worth preserving. Like memories. If you tear everything down, what's left to remember? Adrian rested his chin on his hand, his eyes catching the glow of the warm light. I see it differently. Keeping the old is fine, but what if it's cracked walls and leaky roofs? Sometimes you have to tear it down to rebuild. The new might be more beautiful, more useful. Sounds exactly like the property developers I've audited. Evie narrowed her eyes. He chuckled. Not quite. I don't want to destroy. I want to breathe new life into the old. Something in his tone gave Evie pause. Amid the steam of the chowder, his words carried a weight that didn't feel like a performance. Adrian set his spoon down and leaned back. Have you ever heard of Fremont Loom? Evie blinked. The old textile mill by the Fremont River? It's been abandoned for over a decade. Exactly. My studio and I are restoring it into a community library. Ground floor cafe, second floor open library, top floor gallery space for young artists. His voice brimmed with enthusiasm, his eyes shining as though he could already see every brick and window frame. Without thinking, Evie murmured, sounds like a dream, but who'd invest in that? Adrian nodded. Second Harbor Foundation is considering it, but I need support from inside, from people like you. Evie froze. You know where I work? You accidentally mentioned the foundation's name at the bar. I wasn't snooping. Adrian smiled, waving a hand lightly. And even if you end up auditing this project, I don't want special treatment. I just want you to see its real value. Evie bit her lip, her heart skipping unexpectedly. Since when has a man spoken about an abandoned mill with the same intensity as someone speaking of love? Dinner carried on with smaller stories. Adrian shared about his internship days in Rome, where he sketched hundreds of church domes. Evie recounted how her co-workers nicknamed her the Receipt Police. They laughed, more at ease than either had anticipated. But when Mira brought out dessert, apple pie sprinkled with cinnamon, Evie quietly rebuilt her guard. Don't get carried away, Evie. He's someone you might have to audit. You can't let ideals or smiles blur your judgment. She set her spoon down, adjusting her glasses. Anyway, thank you for the invitation, but we should treat this as just a social dinner. Adrian studied her, as if he wanted to say more, but in the end he only nodded. If that's what you want. But I'll still move forward with Fremont Loom, with or without your support. Evie pressed her lips together, feeling both relieved and oddly disappointed. When she left Salt and Story, the Seattle drizzle was still falling. She stood beneath the awning, clutching the bouquet of yellow tulips, the proof of an invitation without an audience. Logic told her to keep her distance, but somewhere deep inside, small and stubborn, a voice whispered, maybe even an old textile mill deserves a chance to be reborn. That night in Seattle, it was raining again. Not a heavy downpour, but the familiar drizzle that made the air damp, hair frizzy, and brand new shoes quickly stained. Evie pulled her coat collar tighter, trailing after Adrian through the empty streets, half curious, half cautious. Where exactly are you taking me? She asked, suspicion in her voice. Hopefully not another bar. I've used up my annual quota of fake wife appearances. Adrian gave a soft laugh. No bar. Somewhere. I think you'll want to see, but if you don't, you have full permission to scold me. The vague reply only heightened Evie's wariness. But a few minutes later, when they turned onto a narrow brick-paved street, she stopped dead in her tracks. At the corner stood an old storefront with a faded wooden sign. Dust covered the steps, and the door was long sealed shut. And yet, in the darkened window, a single red paper lantern still glowed warm and golden. its flickering silhouette trembling against the fog glass. Evie's chest tightened. She recognized it instantly. Lantern Light, her mother's bookstore. Ever since her mother had passed away, the shop had been locked in silence. No way! Her throat constricted. The electricity was cut off years ago. She spun toward Adrian, suspicion flashing in her eyes. Wait, how do you even know this place? This isn't somewhere you just happened to bring someone. Adrian faltered for a moment, but didn't look away. I passed by here a few times. Every time it rains, that lantern lights up. People say someone still pays the bill to keep it on. I don't know why, but the sight of it reminded me of what you said at Salt and Story, about keeping the old rather than tearing it down. So tonight, I thought, maybe you'd want to see it. Evie studied him, searching for a trace of boastfulness, but all she saw was sincerity. He had no idea this was her private memory. Something inside her softened, resisting the urge to push back. The lantern's glow pulled her into countless childhood afternoons. Her mother, hairpinned in a low bun, smiled gently whenever a customer found the right book. The bell chimed each time someone stepped inside. The scent of fresh paper mingled with the aroma of chamomile tea, and the last phone call from her mother, one she'd missed because she was too busy reviewing figures in a report. Evie brushed quickly at her eyes. Sorry, I didn't mean to cry. It's okay, Adrian said quietly. Some memories, if you don't cry for them, they'll never heal. She turned toward him. He didn't add anything, no shallow words of comfort. He simply stood there, letting her cry for a few seconds, then breathe. And that silence, oddly enough, was what eased her most. When she had calmed, Evie asked softly, Do you know who's been paying the bills here? Adrian shook his head. I've only heard rumors. People call him Winston, an anonymous benefactor who sometimes sends free books to local reading clubs. Always signs the name Winston. Evie frowned. Sounds like a cat's name. Adrian laughed. Maybe. Or maybe just a mystery man who wants to keep a light burning without anyone knowing. Either way, it's admirable. Evie nodded faintly. A strange gratitude welled up inside her, for the stranger who had quietly kept her mother's memory alive with a stubborn little glow. Suddenly, the drizzle thickened into a downpour. They both rushed under the bookstore's awning. Adrian shook out his jacket, his hair a soaked mess, looking every bit like a character from a slapstick film. You look like a drowned rat, Evie blurted out. And you're any better? Adrian shot back, pointing at her glasses covered in raindrops. You'll need windshield wipers just to read your reports. Evie burst out laughing, the sound mingling with the storm. The air between them lightened. They stood side by side under the narrow awning, listening to the rain drum on the tiled roof. Inside, the red lantern still glowed, reflecting in Evie's eyes like a tiny star. At some point, Adrian's hand brushed against hers. At first, it was just a tentative touch, as if asking whether she'd pull away. Evie stiffened, then let it be. His hand was warm, a sharp contrast to the damp, chilled night air. In that moment, there were no spectators, no roles of fake wife, just two people, one memory, and the defiant glow of a lantern that refused to go out. The rain eased to a drizzle. Evie gently withdrew her hand, drawing in a deep breath. Thank you for bringing me here. You didn't know, but this place, it means a lot to me. Adrian gave a slight nod, not pressing, not prying. I just think some lights deserve to be kept burning, no matter who's keeping them lit. Evie turned away, but inside she knew. The wall she'd built from numbers and logic had just cracked, and through that crack, his warm hand had found its way in. On Tuesday, the Second Harbor Foundation office was unusually quiet. Some colleagues had opted to work from home because of the rain. Evie, however, stayed glued to her desk, buried under a towering stack of files. The familiar routine. Black coffee, hair neatly tied back, red pen at the ready. She jokingly called her job using a magnifying glass to inspect every penny. But today, instead of the usual dry reports, she turned to the Fremont Loom file, and strangely enough, just a few pages in, something made her pause. She narrowed her eyes, comparing two nearly identical sheets. The descriptions were almost the same. The numbers were perfectly round, like donuts. Evie let out a soft laugh. And when donuts are this plump, they're bound to have excess fat. She flipped further, her fingers tapping unconsciously on the desk. One page bore an official stamp. At a glance, it seemed legitimate, but when she examined the faint lettering in the bottom right corner, Evie froze. Cole and Tide Studio. She sank into her chair. No way, right? Why is Adrian's studio stamp in this file? The question pricked her mind like a tiny needle. It didn't draw blood, but it stung each time she thought about it. That afternoon, a message from Adrian popped up. Latin dance class tonight. You got 2 left feet? I need a partner who can keep up with my disasters. Evie laughed out loud. Her heart shouted, go, but her logic whispered, don't forget the faint stamp in those files. Still, in the end, she showed up at the dance studio in a simple dress, hair tied high. The instructor called out, Uno, dos, tres. Evie stepped with her left foot. Adrian also stepped with his left. The result, her shoe now sported a long black scuff across the toe. Trying to draw new borderlines, are you? Evie shot him a glare. Sorry, promise next time I'll step lighter. Adrian winced. That's not a promise. That's a threat. The whole class burst out laughing. The instructor shook his head and dubbed them the 2 left feet couple. But at least amid the lively music, Evie forgot about that troubling stamp for a while. When she got home, Winston 2.0, the vacuum robot with 2 googly eyes stuck on, came charging at her ankle like a loyal guard dog. Not again, Evie sighed. The robot spun on its wheels, then lunged at a red scarf teddy bear on the sofa. With a growling motor, it attacked like a soldier in battle. The bear toppled, one plastic eye popping loose, looking like a hapless casualty. Hands on her hips, Evie scolded, Winston, you're a stuffed animal assassin. Her phone buzzed. Another text from Adrian. Thanks for letting me step on you. Next time, I'll lower the damage rate to 10%. Evie snorted, typing back. I'll document that progress in the quarterly report. She set the phone aside, but her gaze drifted back to the Fremont Loom file on the table. Lifting a page, she turned it so that it was under the desk lamp. 3 invoices, nearly identical in terms of sum, all bearing the stamp of Cole and Tide. It could just be a coincidence. It could just be bureaucratic redundancy. But it could also be something else. She inhaled deeply. If she asked Adrian directly, what if he thought she didn't trust him? But if she didn't ask, the truth might never come out. Her job wasn't to avoid questions, it was to find answers. Evie let the paper slip back onto the stack and leaned against her chair. In the living room, Winston 2.0 finally subdued the teddy bear, beeping in victory. Evie shook her head, half amused, half exasperated. Even the robot faces problems head on. Why am I hesitating? She opened the window, watching the rain streak down the streetlights outside. The lamps blurred into mist. Her heart wanted to hold on to the innocence that had begun sprouting over the past few meetings. But her work kept pressing a needle into her palm, a subtle sting reminding her something wasn't right. Evie closed the file and hugged it tightly to her chest. Tomorrow, I'll decide whether to ask Adrian or not. Tonight, though, she let Winston 2.0 continue his heroics against stuffed animals, while she allowed herself to drift off to sleep, still caught between doubt and longing, with no clear answer. Salton's story was busier than usual that evening. Outside, the rain had just stopped, droplets still clinging to the windows, catching the golden glow of the street lamps. Evie sat at her usual table near the old bookshelf. Mira had already ordered 2 bowls of clam chowder, but the quick-witted friend excused herself. The kitchen needs me, clearly just to leave the space for them. Adrian arrived a little later, sleeves rolled up on his shirt, his hair still damp from the rain. He dropped a thick portfolio of drawings by his chair and smiled. Sorry, the construction meeting ran longer than expected. Fremont Loom always makes me lose track of time. Evie gave a small nod. She had prepared a question, but facing his eyes, the words snagged in her throat. She couldn't just blurt out, why does your studio's stamp appear on these suspicious invoices? But she couldn't act like nothing was wrong either. She stirred her spoon in the bowl and let slip instead. I heard that project is pretty stressful, isn't it? Adrian exhaled honestly. Very stressful. Fremont Loom isn't just an old building. It's the memory of an entire neighborhood. I can't let it collapse again. If progress slows, the donors lose heart, and the developers circling outside are ready to pounce. I've had to run around doing everything. Accounting, paperwork, just to keep the project moving. Evie listened, her heart softening but also aching. Was that why he'd signed off on those documents? Just to keep the cash flowing? Part of her wanted to believe him. Another part reminded her, don't let emotions cloud your judgment. Adrian tried a light smile as if to break the tension. Sometimes I think if I had another fake wife to organize the paperwork, I'd be a lot less stressed. Evie laughed, but before she could answer, a shrill voice cut in. Oh, speaking of husbands and wives, I must have arrived at the perfect time. Lauren appeared, golden hair gleaming, red dress blazing. She walked straight to their table, her gaze scanning every detail. Hello, Adrian. And wife. Her voice stretched mockingly. You two look so happy together. I should mark it in my calendar. Anniversary of the fairy tale couple. Evie froze, her smile stiff. Adrian's brow creased slightly. Lauren, we're in the middle of dinner. Oh, I don't mean to intrude. Lauren pulled out a chair and sat down, very much intruding. Just wanted to offer a tiny reminder, Evie. In our line of work, emotions are dangerous. Don't let a bit of personal confusion put your career at risk, especially when you're auditing projects that some people at this table have staked their lives on. Evie looked up at her. Each word was like a sharp little blade, too shallow to draw blood, but enough to leave scratches. Adrian's voice turned firm. Lauren, that's enough. But Lauren was already rising, adjusting her purse and tossing back a smile as sweet as artificial sugar. I'm only being considerate. Enjoy your dinner. Just remember, between your heart and your spreadsheets, choose the right one. She swept out, leaving behind a trail of perfume and an air strung tight as a wire. Evie sat in silence for a long moment. The spoon in her hand had gone cold, but her chest burned with a storm of emotions. On one hand, she wanted to laugh at Lauren's obvious theatrics. On the other, the warning struck at her greatest fear. If I let feelings interfere, will I fail at my job? Adrian finally broke the silence, his voice gentler. Don't listen to her. Lauren survives by planting doubt in others. Fremont Loom means everything to me, and I would never do anything to harm it. Trust me. Evie looked straight into his eyes, honest, steady, yet Lauren's shadow still hovered in her mind, like a stubborn ink stain. She drew a long breath, managing a small smile, her voice calm. I need more time. There are figures I still need to reconcile. Once I'm certain, I'll tell you. Adrian nodded, no reproach, no pressure. I'll wait. Whatever happens, I want you to believe I have nothing to hide. Outside, the drizzle had returned. Evie tightened her grip on her bag strap. Dinner was supposed to be light and easy, but now all she could hear in her head was Lauren's parting words. Between your heart and your spreadsheets, choose the right one. The office of the foundation was unusually quiet that day. Evie sat alone before the glow of 3 monitors, her fingers clutching a red pen. After days of combing, comparing, and cross-checking every figure, the needle of her audit had landed on one place, $2.3 million. 3 invoices bundled together. The same descriptions, identical amounts, were issued within 2 weeks of each other, and they all shared one chilling detail, printed on the office machine of Cole and Tide. Evie closed the file, feeling as if her heart had been clamped inside it. Each line on the page seemed to whisper, that man is not clean. She told herself, don't let feelings interfere. You're an auditor. Work is work. But her heart rebelled, pounding furiously as if unwilling to accept it. That evening, she met Adrian at a quiet cafe by the river. He arrived with his usual ease, shirt collar open, hands still smudged with charcoal from sketching. But when he saw the grave look on her face, his smile faltered. What's wrong? He asked, pulling out the chair across from her. Evie placed the file on the table, opening it page by page. Her voice trembled slightly, but it was firm. Can you explain this? 3 invoices totaling $2.3 million, all printed from your office machine, and the Kohl and Tide stamp in a place it has no business being. Adrian froze. He bent over the stack of papers, his face tightening. After a long moment, he lifted his head, brown eyes burning with anguish. Evie, I swear, I had no idea these documents even existed. I didn't do this. Evie gripped her pen tighter, trying to hold steady. But ink doesn't lie. The stamp is here. Your printer. How can I ignore that? Someone in the studio could have used it without me knowing. Adrian pressed a hand to his forehead. I don't monitor every single printout, but I have never taken a dime from Fremont Loom. His voice cracked on the last words, but Evie couldn't soften. Lauren's warning echoed in her mind. Don't let emotions ruin your career. She shut the file with a sharp breath. I need to stay objective. I can't defend you just because we've shared a few evenings together. Adrian's eyes darkened. He gave a small nod, like a man accepting a sentence. I understand. If you have to choose between me and your job, choose your job. But believe me, Evie, the truth will come out. He rose, his shadow stretching long across the floor where the rain had seeped in through the doorway. Evie didn't stop him. That night, Evie returned to the little street where Lantern Light stood. The old shop remained sealed shut, and as always, the red lantern inside glowed faintly, casting its stubborn warmth into the night. But this time, the light didn't comfort her. It only reminded her of that moment in the rain with Adrian, his hand clasping hers. She stepped onto the porch, staring at the defiant glow for a long time. Tears pressed at her eyes, but she forced them back. With cold resolve, she reached for the outside switch. The lantern went dark. The corner sank into shadow. Her whisper broke against her own throat. I can't let my heart lead me astray. I have to stay objective. Suddenly, rain burst down again, lashing against the glass. Evie turned away, walking into the storm, leaving behind a darkened porch and a dead lantern, her own silent proof of the decision she had made. That morning, when Evie walked into the Second Harbor Foundation office, the atmosphere was off. People whispered, eyes glued to their phone screens. Patricia, the curly-haired receptionist, shot her a glance, then hastily closed a news tab as if afraid Evie might see. What's going on? Evie frowned. No one answered. Only when she sat down and opened her laptop did the headline hit her square in the face. Playboy architect fakes a wife to cover up Fremont Loom financial scandal. Beneath it was a grainy photo, she and Adrian at Sultan Story, laughing, their hands almost touching. The article twisted the story beyond recognition, Adrian parading around a fake wife as the perfect cover, while in reality he was allegedly misappropriating millions in donor funds. The byline, Teddy Brooks. A chill swept through Evie's spine. That afternoon, an emergency board meeting convened at the Foundation's council room. Director Morley laid the newspaper on the table, her voice sharp and firm. In light of this situation, Second Harbor has no choice but to suspend all disbursements for Fremont Loom. We cannot allow a single dollar out the door while the media is in an uproar over this scandal. Someone spoke up. Perhaps it's time to reconsider selling to Morrow Urban. They've long expressed interest in buying that property. Evie's heart plummeted straight to the floor. Morrow? If that happened, Fremont Loom would become a gleaming shopping complex, wiping out the memory of the neighborhood forever. She wanted to protest, to shout that Adrian wasn't greedy, that Fremont Loom deserved saving, but Lauren's voice replayed in her head. Don't let feelings ruin your career. Evie bit her lip hard and stayed silent. That evening, Evie sat at Sultan Story, her head buried in her hands. Mira set down a steaming mug of hot cocoa in front of her, then planted her fists on her hips. Are you going to say anything? Evie sighed. I'm not sure. There are documents. Documents, Mira cut her off, her tone unusually sharp. Evie, you live buried in numbers, but have you ever looked at people? Adrian isn't that kind of man. I don't need proof. I can see it. And so can you, only you're too afraid to admit it. Evie looked up, stunned by the anger blazing in her friend's eyes. Mira pressed on. Don't lose a good man just because you're afraid of being wrong. Some mistakes hurt far worse, like letting go of someone who truly deserves your trust. Evie bit down on her lip, unable to argue. She remembered the warmth of his hand beneath the rain-soaked awning, his awkward smile on the dance floor, the steady conviction in his eyes when he swore he was innocent. But then, just as quickly, the image of those three bundled invoices and the faint studio stamp resurfaced. Silence. The only sound in the cafe was the chopping of knives from Mira's kitchen. Evie held the cocoa, letting the steam warm her cheeks. Her heart wanted to believe, but her mind forced her into silence. That night, when she returned to the street where lantern lights stood, Evie looked up at its dark window. The lantern had been extinguished since the night before, by her own hand. The corner now looked soulless, just like she felt, stranded at a crossroads, torn between holding on to faith or letting it go. Rain began again, droplets pattering against the pavement. Evie stood there for a long time, her hand clenched tight on her bag strap, and inside her mind, Mira's words echoed. Don't lose a good man just because you're afraid of being wrong. Still following the story? If this story found you outside of Soul Stories, we invite you home, to where every touching tale begins with truth, hope, and heart. Seattle's rain seemed endless these days. Evie sat alone in the foundation office, her eyes fixed on the monitor's glow. The Fremont Loom files still lay there, silent, as if daring her. But today, instead of rereading line after line, she dove straight into the original files the contractors had uploaded into the system. She opened the archive folder, heart pounding. In theory, the PDFs were all generated from a standard accounting program. But when Evie compared the metadata, something strange appeared. File 1, created December 18th, 10:14 a.m. File 2, created December 22nd, 2:05 p.m. File 3, created December 24th, 11:47 p.m. Christmas Eve. Who works on financial records nearly at midnight on Christmas? Evie frowned, tapping her pen against the desk. A small detail, but to her it was like a crack in a wall. And when there's a crack, there's always something bigger inside. She switched to the printer logs. The foundation was allowed to monitor remotely, devices linked to the Fremont Loom project. On the record, the entry appeared CTPRN02. Print time, also December 24th, 11:50 p.m. Evie froze. That printer was indeed Colin Tide's, but who had used it? 2 days later, thanks to a contact in the building management where Colin Tide rented their office, Evie obtained a copy of the Christmas Eve security footage. The video shook slightly under the dim yellow light. A figure entered, baseball cap pulled low, shoulders much narrower than Adrian's. The person plugged in a USB and hit print. Paper slid out, stamped quickly. The face was obscured, but the side profile was clear enough for Evie to recognize. Noah, the young architect, Adrian's trusted assistant. Evie clenched her fists. Part of her felt relief. At least it wasn't Adrian. But anger and disappointment flared just as strongly. Why Noah? And why forge documents that could push Adrian into disaster? She arranged to meet Noah at a small cafe at the end of the street. When Evie walked in, Noah nearly spilled his latte in shock. Barely past 20, with freckles across his face, he looked like a kid caught with his hand in the cookie jar. "Hi, Miss Evie," Noah stammered, eyes darting away. Evie didn't waste time. She placed the USB with the footage on the table, her voice calm but firm. "Christmas Eve, Colin Tide's office. You printed those invoices. Why?" Noah's face went pale, his hands twisting together. For a long moment he breathed hard, like someone running uphill before whispering, "They forced me." "They who?" Evie pressed. "Morrow Urban." The name sent a chill down Evie's spine. Noah dropped his gaze, the words spilling out in a flood. "Mr. Morrow's people approached me. They said all I had to do was print a few papers, add the stamp, and in return, I'd get a new life advance. They promised me a scholarship in Europe, a shining job. I was weak." Evie's eyes blazed, her heart a knot of fury and pity. "Do you realize what you've done? You've thrown Adrian, your own boss, into a trap. He's been branded as an embezzler, and Fremont Loom is about to be swallowed whole." Tears welled in Noah's eyes. "I know, I regret it so much. But when they put the cash right in front of me, I panicked, and I took it. I never thought it would spiral out of control like this. I thought it was just a few sheets of paper. Evie drew in a deep, painful breath. All this time she had doubted Adrian, turned her back on him, while the real betrayal came from this young man. Her voice shook. You have to tell the truth. The evidence, the transactions, everything. It's the only way to clear Adrian and save Fremont Loom. Noah shook his head frantically, terrified. If I speak up, they'll destroy me. Mr. Morrow, he can end my career before it even begins. Evie's hand curled into a fist. Do you think staying silent will save your career? What you're holding isn't a scholarship. It's a sentence. Not just for Adrian, but for yourself. Noah bit his lip, eyes blurring. In that moment, he looked no older than a lost child caught in a storm too big for him. On her way home, Evie pulled her raincoat tighter, stepping through puddles that shimmered with streetlight. In her mind, voices clashed. Noah's shaken confession, Adrian's broken look when faced with the files, Mira's sharp rebuke. Don't lose a good man just because you're afraid of being wrong. She knew she couldn't stay silent any longer. What Noah revealed wasn't a mistake. It was a scheme. And if she pieced the fragments together, the truth would surface. Yet guilt still pressed heavily on her chest. I doubted him. I was the one who turned off the brightest lantern. Evie stopped at the corner where lantern light stood. The shop was dark, lifeless. Raindrops tapped against the awning. She stood there a long time, hand trembling on the switch outside, but she pulled it back. Not yet, she whispered. The lantern will shine again, when the truth does. 2 days later, the little cafe at the end of the street still smelled faintly of cinnamon and played old Christmas tunes. Evie sat across from Noah again, the silver USB drive lying between them like a tiny bomb. He trembled, fingers twisted tightly together, eyes darting anywhere but hers. Noah, Evie said slowly, her voice steady but firm, if you hand over everything, emails, transfer records, and the original PR contract Lauren drafted, you'll still have a chance to make this right. If you hold on to it, it will only drag you down further. Noah shook his head, his voice breaking. I'm scared. They'll destroy me. Lauren, Morrow, they have power. I'm just an intern. Evie rested her hand lightly on the USB, her gaze unflinching. Do you really think they'll spare you? When everything comes out, they'll need a scapegoat, and that scapegoat will be you. Adrian is already carrying the blame for you. Are you really going to sit back and watch the man who trusted you be buried alive? Noah blinked rapidly, tears glinting in the warm yellow light. After a long pause, he pulled out a crumpled envelope from his bag. Inside were printed documents and a second USB. This is the contract. I backed it up because I was afraid they'd betray me too. Lauren wrote the directives for the smear campaign. And here, he laid down a few more sheets, bank transfer slips, clearly marked with payments labeled Advance for European Scholarship. Evie exhaled in relief. She gathered everything into the folder, feeling both lighter and heavier at the same time. Only one thing remained. Adrian had to know. They met at the Tide studio, the walls lined with massive drawings. Adrian emerged, eyes ringed with exhaustion, but still carrying a hard edge of resolve. When he saw Noah trailing behind Evie, he froze. Noah! Just one word, heavy as stone. Noah kept his head bowed, lips trembling. Evie gave Adrian a small nod, urging him, hear him out. Adrian stepped closer, stopping right in front of his young protege. No shouting, no rage, just one hoarse question. Why? Silence fell, thick as a curtain. Noah broke down, sobs shaking his shoulders. I was weak. They promised me a scholarship, a prestigious job, and a new life. I saw the money, the chance, and I was afraid I'd never get it if I stayed just an assistant forever. I betrayed you. Tears splattered onto the blueprint spread across the table, smearing into dark stains. Adrian stared at him quietly, his face carved with deep disappointment. But when he spoke, his voice was gentler. Noah, if you had come to me from the start, I could have found a way to help you. Instead, you took the shortcut, and it shoved Fremont looms straight into the wolf's mouth. Do you understand you almost killed a whole memory? Noah's breath hitched, and he collapsed into a chair. I'm sorry. I don't expect forgiveness. Just, please give me a chance to set this right. I'll hand over all the evidence. I'll testify, expose Morrow and Lauren. Just don't let me lose everything. Evie laid her hand on his shoulder, gentle but unyielding. Chances don't fall from the sky, Noah. You have to step up and fight for them. This is the last one you'll get. After this, either you save yourself, or there will be nothing left. Adrian stayed silent, then turned away, bracing his hands against the table, staring out through the rain-streaked window. After a long moment, he gave a slight nod. Start by telling the truth, all of it. Noah wiped his tears, still shaking, but his eyes flickered with a fragile light, like a lifeline had just been thrown his way. When Noah finally left, only Evie and Adrian remained. The rain whispered against the awning outside, blending with the steady hum of the plotter in the corner. Evie placed the folder on the desk, meeting Adrian's gaze. You see, it wasn't you. They set the trap. I'm sorry for doubting you. Adrian turned, his eyes weary but carrying a flicker of relief. You were doing your job. I don't blame you. But Evie, thank you for chasing the truth. I thought it was all over. In that moment, their eyes locked. No defenses, no walls. Just the truth laid bare, and a fragile but fierce new trust rising in its place. Evie smiled faintly, the weight on her shoulders finally lifting. For the first time in weeks, she felt the lantern she had extinguished inside herself begin to glow again. On Tuesday morning, the Second Harbor Foundation office buzzed with unusual energy. Patricia, the curly-haired receptionist, struggled to carry in a heavy cardboard box, which she dropped on Evie's desk. For you, Evie, your name's on it. Sender, Winston Cole, looks like books. Books? Evie frowned. Yep, the label says Lantern Light Reading Club. Some old community reading club is still in our system, I think. Patricia shrugged and walked off. Evie froze. Lantern Light, her mother's bookstore. The place where, on many afternoons, her mother would read fairy tales to children from the neighborhood. After her mother's passing, the shop had gone silent, but clearly the club's name still lingered in the community database, and now the package had been forwarded to the foundation under her name. Her hands trembled as she tore open the tape. Inside was a stack of books, classic novels, children's stories, old poetry, the exact kinds of books her mother once stocked on the wooden shelves. On the very top was a handwritten note. For the weekend reading club, Lantern Light, Winston Cole. Evie sat frozen. The handwriting was too familiar, too distinct. The slight rightward slant, the long cross on the letter T, exactly like the handwriting she had seen Adrian scrawl across his architectural sketches. Almost no one wrote that way. Cole, his surname. Winston, the same mysterious figure who had been paying the electric bill to keep the lantern glowing. Her heart pounded, a storm of confusion and light. Could Winston Cole be him? That afternoon, she sent a message. Evie, I need to ask you something, not about the files. Can we meet? Adrian, on the Bainbridge ferry? When my head's a mess, I go to the water. Evie, all right. The ferry deck was swept by the wind. Rain misted the gray expanse of water, the city shrinking into the distance behind them. Evie and Adrian stood by the railing, each holding a steaming cup of coffee. Rainy Seattle, Adrian said with a faint smile, always seems to drag worries out of us. Evie inhaled deeply, then spoke plainly. I received a box of books addressed to Lantern Light. Inside was a note signed W. Cole. I recognized the handwriting. She turned to face him fully. Winston is you, isn't it? Adrian was silent for a few seconds, the wind blowing his hair across his forehead. Finally, he set his cup on the railing, his voice low. Yes, Winston is me. But actually, it was the name of a cat I had back in architecture school. A gray tabby, a fat belly, and a face that always looked apologetic. On rainy nights, it would lie on my chest, snoring, and somehow I felt less alone. I started using its name to sign the little things I did, sending books, paying an old power bill, keeping certain lights from going out. Evie stared at him, stunned. He hadn't been trying to boast, nor to claim gratitude. He had simply quietly kept certain places lit because he believed they deserved it. "You didn't know Lantern Light belonged to my mother?" she asked softly. Adrian's head snapped up, his eyes wide. "What?" "It's true," Evie nodded, her voice trembling. "My mom owned the shop. She passed away 3 years ago. Since then, it's been closed, but every time it rained, I saw the red lantern glow. I never understood why. Now I know. It was you." Adrian went still. The wind whipped his coat, but he didn't move. "My God," he whispered. "I thought I was preserving a piece of the city's memory. I didn't realize. I was holding on to yours." Evie's throat ached. "Mom always said, whenever it rained, light the lantern so the lost can find their way home. The night I switched it off, I thought it made me stronger, but really it just made everything darker." Adrian gazed out over the water. In the distance, a lighthouse glimmered faintly through the rain. Lanterns aren't made for sunny days. They're made for the rain. And love is the same. Evie's eyes shone. "You hid your real name because you didn't want me to think you were doing me a favor?" He nodded, his voice rough. "I didn't want you or anyone to think I was doing it for thanks. I wanted the lantern to shine because it deserved to shine, not because some architect named Cole needed to be remembered." Evie let out a trembling laugh through her tears. "I think my mom would have liked you." Adrian turned to her, startled, then softened. "I hope so. At the very least, she had good taste, because she left you to this world." She laughed and playfully punched his shoulder. Then, with nothing left between them, they stood quietly in the rain, their hands brushing together. When the ferry docked, they returned to the street where Lantern Light stood. The awning was damp, the glass door dusty. Evie placed her hand on the same switch she had once flipped off. She whispered, "For the lost, so they can still find their way," and turned it on. The red lantern blazed to life, casting a golden glow across the rain-soaked steps. The entire corner seemed reborn. Adrian looked at the light, then at her. Without another word, he pulled Evie into his arms. Their first embrace, after all the doubts, after all the ice, melted now into warmth. Evie closed her eyes and rested against his chest. She knew with certainty, from this moment on, that lantern would never go dark again. On Friday morning, Teddy Brooks sat in his small apartment, a sleek laptop before him and a dull silver USB drive lying beside it. He had received it from Evie the night before, along with a single pointed sentence. "You want to be a real journalist, not just a clickbait writer? This is your chance." Teddy hesitated. As a freelance reporter, he had long been criticized as half rumor, half truth. But what was on this USB, an audio recording of an internal PR meeting at Morrow Urban, could change everything. He hit play. Lauren's voice rang out, clear and cold. "We'll hammer the image of Adrian Cole as a philanderer, spin the story of a fake wife so the public sees him as a fraud through and through. Crowds love drama, love scandal. Once this spreads, no one will care about Fremont Loom anymore." A pause, then another voice asked, "What if someone checks the actual financial records?" Lauren gave a sharp laugh. "We only need enough time for Morrow to snatch the project. By then, who cares who was right or wrong?" Teddy shut his eyes, trembling all over. This was the truth he had to publish. Without another second of doubt, he opened a blank document and typed the headline. "The Truth Behind the Fremont Loom Scandal, a Dirty PR Campaign by Lauren and Morrow." The article went live at 9 a.m. Within hours, social media erupted. Hundreds of shares, thousands of furious comments. Residents who remembered attending reading sessions at Lantern Light or passing by Fremont Loom voiced their memories and their desire to see the building preserved. An online petition appeared. "Save Fremont Loom. Restore the truth to the city." In just 24 hours, it gathered over 25,000 signatures. Local TV channels picked up the story, replaying old footage. Fremont Loom in its heyday, textile workers smiling at their looms, the bustling neighborhood before it was abandoned. Public pressure surged. The Second Harbor Foundation Board was forced into an emergency meeting. Director Morley stood before the microphone and declared, "We are officially reinstating disbursements for Fremont Loom. The truth is now clear. The project was smeared by unethical media tactics. The foundation will move forward with coal and tide to preserve this historic site." In the boardroom, Evie sat frozen. She had feared until the very last minute, but now it felt as if a stone had been lifted from her shoulders. Adrian turned toward her, his eyes soft. "You did it." Across town, Lauren seethed with rage as she read Teddy's expose. But the audio recordings, the black PR contract on the USB, and Noah's testimony, all of it stood against her. Morrow Urban scrambled into a press conference. Mr. Morrow, pale-faced, read a statement. "We apologize to the community for mishandling information. We are terminating our contract with Lauren Phelps and will fully cooperate with the investigation." Reporters fired questions. Did your company deliberately spread falsehoods to seize Fremont Loom? Morrow dodged, but his evasiveness only stoked public anger further. Lauren's fate was harsher. The leadership dismissed her that very afternoon. As she exited the building, a mob of photographers swarmed her, flashbulbs exploding. The once proud face was now drained, her eyes hollow. After sleepless nights, Noah finally agreed to cooperate with investigators. He submitted all the emails and transfer records and confirmed that Lauren had approached him, coerced him to sign, and lured him with false promises of scholarships. In an internal meeting at Coal and Tide, Adrian sat across from him, voice calm but unyielding. "Noah, I asked you. Why? I think now I know. But you must answer for yourself. Do you want to be remembered as a traitor or as someone who found the courage to make things right?" Noah broke down, collapsing onto the table. I beg for a chance. I'll do everything. Testify, hand over all the evidence, name Morrow and Lauren. Just please don't let me lose everything." Adrian laid a hand on his shoulder, his eyes heavy with sorrow but firm. "The chance is here. Don't waste it again." That evening, as the sun faded behind the clouds, Evie and Adrian stood together before Fremont Loom. The old building was still streaked with moss, its broken windows catching the weak golden light. But now dozens of citizens had gathered, holding signs. "Save Fremont Loom. Don't let Morrow erase our memories." A group of high school students strummed guitars, singing an old tune once heard in the textile halls. An elderly woman with silver hair smiled through tears. "I used to work here. Never thought I'd live to see Loom come back to life." Evie squeezed Adrian's hand. "Do you hear it? The city is standing with us." He nodded, eyes shining with renewed conviction. "Not just us. This truth belongs to everyone." That night, Teddy called. His voice was a mix of excitement and emotion. "The article is the most read this month, but more importantly, people are beginning to believe again that journalism can expose the truth, not just peddle gossip. Thank you, Evie. Thank you, Adrian." Evie smiled and replied, "No, Teddy. You chose the harder path, telling the truth. The city needed that." The following day, the Second Harbor Foundation re-signed its contract with Coal and Tide. New disbursements were approved immediately. Fremont Loom was officially safe from being sold off. In the boardroom, Evie presented the revised financial plans. Adrian stood at the far end of the table, watching her quietly, pride clear in his eyes. She realized then, they hadn't just saved a building, they had restored trust in the city and in themselves. That night, Evie returned to Lantern Light Street. The red lantern had been glowing since the night before, but she wanted to see it once more. As she stepped onto the porch, she found Adrian already there, hands in his coat pockets, gazing at the light. "Tomorrow it will all be official," he said. "Lauren ousted, Morrow forced to apologize, the foundation reinstating support. But more than that, Fremont Loom will live again. And he paused, his eyes softening. "I won't have to carry it alone anymore." Evie smiled, stepping closer. "Because from now on, we'll keep this lantern together." He turned, and for the first time in the damp, cold Seattle night, Evie didn't hesitate. She wrapped her arms around him first. Adrian pulled her close, leaving no space between them. The red lantern glowed above, casting its shadow long across the wet pavement. The city outside still dripped with rain, but in Evie's heart, one truth shone clear. Keeping a lantern burning in the rain wasn't just a duty, it was love. That morning, Seattle didn't ruffle the city with a gray downpour, but only dusted a thin veil of mist, like shimmering highlighter on a cheek. The stray beams of sunlight decided to show up, climbing onto the edge of the new metal roof, touching the stained glass windows of the Fremont Loom's lobby, and breaking into little rainbows. In the square, people had already crowded in since the church bells nearby struck 8. Food trucks lined up in rows, waffles, hot dogs, warm coffee, cocoa topped with cream. A high school band was tuning its instruments. The air was festive, bustling, eager, like the whole city had inhaled deeply just to celebrate. At exactly 9 o'clock, the symphony of bells rang out. From the newly restored bell tower, the first toll rolled, then the second, then the third, blending with the clapping hands of children, with the clicking of Teddy's camera shutter. Faces lifted skyward as the stained glass, still sprinkled with soft rain, caught the sunlight and scattered it into warm fragments. "Better than I imagined," Mira said, slipping on a headband with bunny ears while handing out programs. She winked at Evie. "Time to play the hostess." Evie smiled. Today she wore a deep blue dress with a cream trench coat. Inside her, there was nervousness, happiness, and the sense that she was touching the brightest version of herself. After everything this day had come, Adrian walked up, wearing a white shirt, a charcoal vest, and a loosely tied tie. His mere presence drew older folks toward him. "Here's the architect." He bowed, his face both proud and humble. When his eyes met Evie's, the square seemed to quiet. A slight nod, a barely hidden smile, a soft greeting. "We did it." "We," Evie repeated, her heart ready to burst with confetti. A wooden stage stood before the main doors. The ribbon for the ceremony wasn't plastic, but a handmade strip of fabric woven from threads salvaged by former workers, now stitched into something new. When the MC introduced her, Evie stepped up. She glanced over the microphone, catching not so much her mother's figure in the crowd as the tender feeling she always had when about to do something memorable. Evie's voice rang clear, no strain needed. Someone once asked, "Why keep an old building instead of building something new?" My answer is, houses keep memories. Here, there used to be the sound of looms, laughter during breaks, sweat and dreams pressed into every brick. She gestured toward the glass hallway. Black and white photos of the loom at its peak, interspersed with shots of restorers sanding, painting, fitting, tiny fragments of the past warming the present. But if memories stay only inside walls, they turn to dust. The keepers of a house are us. We keep it alive by walking in, reading, learning, laughing, playing, starting clubs, and continuing the story in our own way. Starting today, Fremont Loom belongs to everyone. From the baby with their first picture book to the grandmother telling one last tale at night. Applause burst out. Someone whistled. A boy held up a cardboard sign, "Fremont Loom equals second home." Evie smiled, blinking rapidly so she wouldn't blink away tears. "And one more thing," she said. "Thank you to everyone who signed, who shared, who stood in the rain to protect it. Thank you to those brave enough to make things right. Thank you to the one who kept the lights on through the storm. This city is beautiful because we believe in each other." "The best part's coming," Teddy muttered behind his lens. He glanced at his colleagues, joking. "Okay, headline this, but don't make it too sappy. Or actually, go ahead and make it sappy." Evie stepped back half a pace. Adrian stepped forward. Without a mic, he reached out his hand. In front of the community, he held Evie's hand. No more fake wife, no more pretending. Applause roared. Someone shouted, "Kiss! Kiss!" Mira stuck out her tongue and made a silly face at the crowd. "Quiet down, ribbon first." The ceremonial knife gleamed. Together, Evie and Adrian cut the woven strip. As the fabric split, the bell tower tolled once like a beat in time. The great doors opened, spilling golden light. Fremont Loom, open. Inside the grand hall, people poured in like a fresh breeze. Shoulder-high shelves brimmed with everything from Shakespeare's plays to balcony gardening handbooks. In the center, a co-working zone of pale wooden tables, cushioned chairs, neat power outlets, as if whispering, "Sit down and write something kind." The east corner, the children's reading area, was a rainbow burst of joy. Cloud-shaped cushions, white shag carpet, mini rainbow-painted bookshelves. And in the middle, Winston 2.0. The legendary vacuum robot is now dressed to the hilt by Mira. Eyes 3 times bigger, long lashes, fake whiskers, and a baseball cap. A little sign read, "Sir Winston, guardian of teddy bears, sucking away all fears." Kids swarmed it, chanting, "Winston! Winston!" The robot growled playfully, rolling after a fabric ball Mira tossed. A boy turned back. "Miss, does it eat pencils?" Evie answered seriously, "Only cookie crumbs." The kids squealed with laughter. "Can we give it even bigger eyes?" a girl asked. "Oh, let me see if I've got extra large ones," Mira said, pulling out enormous eyes from her bag. The children clapped like they'd seen magic. Winston 2.0 blinked its new oversized eyes, looking so goofy that Adrian had to grip a shelf to keep from collapsing with laughter. Noah stood hesitantly by the door, holding a box of books. Evie nodded. He smiled, stepped in, placed the box in the kid's corner, and whispered to a child, "Want me to tell the story of the happy tree?" The child nodded eagerly. Sometimes second chances begin with a halting but warm voice. Down the hallway stood Lantern Light, a small wood-paneled room with a red lantern hanging at its door. A carved plaque read, "Lantern Light Reading Lounge." Evie touched it, delighted, as if finding an old home after a long journey. She looked at Adrian. He smiled, gesturing, "You go open it." Evie gathered a group of children, opened the fluffy duckling, and began to read, her voice a bit clumsy but full of fun. Mothers nodded at each other. "Good storyteller." Meanwhile, Teddy darted around, snapping photos of an old weaver touching the displayed loom, interviewing a couple taking selfies before the stained glass. His article would likely open with, "One morning, the city remembered it had a heart." Out in the lobby, volunteers handed out badges embroidered with slogans, "Team Loomer, keep the lights on, Winston's crew." Everyone laughed as they pinned them on. Adrian secretly fastened a tiny lantern-shaped badge onto Evie's coat. She blinked. "It's beautiful. Who's it for?" "For the one who lights things up the most." By midday, the rain had stopped. Sunlight streamed through stained glass, painting pink, blue, and yellow stripes across the shoulders passing by. The student band descended to the ground floor, playing a sweet "Here Comes the Sun." Children swayed, adults clapped, and Winston 2.0 inexplicably glided along in rhythm. Evie was signing the organizer's thank you card when she felt a hand slip into hers. She turned. Adrian. He said nothing, only held her hand, warm and steady. A few cameras caught the moment. Instead of oohs, the crowd cheered joyfully, as if everyone had been waiting for this. Mira whistled teasingly. "My God, I thought this only happened in holiday movies." "What movie?" "This is a series," Teddy said, never looking away from his lens. "Season 2 opens with bells and double XL robot eyes." Adrian leaned in, whispering so only Evie could hear above the music. "If I had to pretend one last thing," he paused, his gaze deep enough to flip her stomach, "I'd pretend to be calm when you're beside me." Evie laughed, cheeks burning. "You pretend well, but your hand is shaking." "That's because the band's playing fast," he argued unconvincingly. "Right," she nodded seriously. "Fast like the heart of someone saying something important." No more words were needed. Their eyes met, enough of a hidden proposal without kneeling or a ring box. Just the right person, the right day, the right light. Mira swooped in like a gust, shoving 2 hot waffles into their hands. "Eat, then head out to the square. They're starting a free dance circle. Anyone who misses a step will get chased by Winston 2.0 cleaning their footprints." The kids heard Winston and shouted, "Winston! Winston!" The robot growled and darted after. A drifting soap bubble. The whole room erupted in laughter. Evie bit into her waffle, powdered sugar dusting her nose. Adrian brushed it away with his thumb. eyes triumphant like he'd solved a tough puzzle. There, confiscated illegal sugar. Oh, please, Evie glared, but her heart melted like frosting. At dusk, the square became a dance floor. A big circle formed, with the student band playing Latin rhythms. Uno, dos, tres, the count rang out. Evie glanced at Adrian. Remember, 2 left feet? Sure do, he replied, but today I've trained 1.5 right ones. They dove into the circle. This time, no stepping on shoes, or if they did, it was lovingly. The crowd clapped to the beat. Stained glass lights above flickered like a fairy tale disco. By the porch, a second lantern lit up at lantern light. Mira announced, Twin lanterns, double the luck. Teddy clicked away, mumbling, Cover photo secured? Noah lifted a child, teaching them to count uno dos tres in his clumsy accent, making the mother laugh uncontrollably. An old man held up his 1968 loom worker badge, bragging, I'm back as chess room manager. The crowd applauded like he'd landed a dream job. The sky cleared, stars peeked out, shy as new guests. But below, no one was shy, talking, laughing, dancing, and grabbing another hot dog, because why not? Winston 2.0 was given a 15-minute recharge break, wearing a sign that read, Snoring. Children guarded it like a national treasure. Evie rested her head on Adrian's shoulder, inhaling the salty breeze clinging to his shirt. She heard his calm pretend heartbeat, then giggled. Hey, she whispered, if we're going to pretend this long, we should start a course. Pretending to stay calm 101. Yeah, he answered. Lesson 1, holding hands. Final exam, keeping them. I claim an A+, Evie declared, squeezing his hand tighter. The bells tolled to close the event, soft like a promise. People drifted into small groups, heading home. But Fremont Loom's lights kept spilling into the street. The stained glass no longer reflected rain. It reflected smiles. Before leaving, Mira yelled, Group photo! Everyone squeezed onto the steps. Teddy set his camera timer, sprinted into the frame, and tripped over. Winston 2.0 out of charge. Laughter exploded. 3, 2, 1, click. The moment was captured, hands linked, eyes bright, a red lantern peeking at the edge like a punctuation mark of happiness. Night settled, warm. No salty nostalgia, only the feeling of being here now, together. Evie and Adrian walked slowly through the hallway, past the children's corner where Winston 2.0 slept, eyes half shut, past lantern light where a young volunteer carefully stacked books. They slipped out the back door, into a damp wooden alley, pausing to gaze at the Loom's facade, an old house renewed. We'll come back tomorrow, Evie said. And the day after, Adrian added. And on rainy days too, they said together, laughing. Somewhere in the city, new stories were beginning. Here the old one was smiling. And as Evie tightened her grip on Adrian's hand, she knew, if anything deserved to be as sturdy as brick, as clear as glass, as bright as lanterns, it was the joy they just lit. Simple, loud enough, radiant. Let's go, Adrian said, before Winston 2.0 thinks we abandoned it on overnight babysitting duty. Evie burst out laughing. Tomorrow it'll be promoted to honorary butler. And me, Adrian asked. You're the professional, pretend to be calm architect. They bumped foreheads, laughed, and stepped into the night, hand in hand, under a sky imperfect but brilliant. Behind them, Fremont Loom still glowed. Ahead, the city opened wide like a brand new book, fresh with the scent of paper, ready for them to write. No need for melancholy ink, only joy free of dust.